Welcome back, everybody. Let's continue in our series in Talmud Esher Sefirot. We're in Chelek Aleph, Perek Bet, Inyan Aleph, Ot Gimel. We're going to be focusing on Ot Gimel and Ot Daled today, which will complete Inyan Aleph. And not only that, but we are slowly approaching the end of Chelek Aleph. Because Chelek Aleph, part 1 of Talmud Esher Sefirot, only has 2 chapters in it. The first chapter we've completed already, and we're about to complete the second chapter regarding the Kav. The first chapter was about the Tzimtzum, and the second chapter is about the Kav. And we're about to finish the second chapter, which means we're about to finish part 1 of Talmud Esher Sefirot. So I hope to continue next week with Inyan Bet, and I think we have a few more episodes before we finish part 1, but I'm very excited that we're rapidly approaching the end of part 1. That's a very big accomplishment for me, as this is my first time teaching Talmud Esher Sefirot, so it's a very big achievement for me. But so let's remind ourselves what we're talking about here. So I'm going to bring the words of the Arizal from Inyan Aleph here, and then we're going to transition over to the Or Pnimi, the inner light of Rav Ashlag's commentary on a couple key terms here from Ot Gimel and Ot Daled of the Arizal's words. So let's just bring the words of the Arizal first. Vehine achar hatzimtzum hanizkor la'ayl, asher az nishe'er makom hachalal ve'avir panui ve'rekani be'emtza or Ein Sof mamash kenizkor la'ayl. After the Tzimtzum, wherein which a void and a place of emptiness remained in the middle of the endless light itself, הנה כבר היה מקום שיוכלו לחיות שם הנצלים והנבראים והיצורים והנעשים. Behold, there was already a space wherein which the emanations, creations, formations, and the made entities could exist. ואז המשיך מן אור אינסוף קו אחד ישר מן האור העגול שלו. And then, from the light of the Ein Sof, extends a singular line of light from his round light, meaning from the round light of the Ein Sof, milamala lamata, from above to below, v'mishtel shel, v'yored toch hachalal hahu. And this line concatenates and descends into the midst of that void. So to summarize, the Arizal is explaining here that after the Tzimtzum, wherein which there remains a halal, after the Tzimtzum happens, a halal is formed, a void, a place that is empty. And it is within this place, within this empty space, that the various creatures could exist. The 4 worlds, Atzilut, Bria, Yatzira, Asiya, each one of these worlds has entities and beings that live in them. And those entities and those worlds themselves, the very worlds themselves, could only exist within this void that God created. Before the Tzimtzum, these various worlds and levels of reality, albeit they are concealments of the endless light, they were unable to be revealed because everything was nullified to the endless light of God, where there are no differences. There are no multiple worlds. There are no dimensions. There are no levels. Everything's equal and even. So it must be that the only way that these differences can be revealed, these various worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yatzira, Asiya, is whenever the endless light of the Ein Sof should be contracted, which means to be withdrawn from reality, in order to give space wherein which the various worlds that God desires to create can be made. So it is within the void that remains after the Tzimtzum that the worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yatzira, and Asiya are created. It's within the void which has remained empty after the Tzimtzum that the creation is made within. But there are 2 things here that he says that we're going to unpack. Number 1 is that from the endless light of Ein Sof, a singular line of light emerges and descends from above to below into the void. And this is what's happening after the Tzimtzum. In order to create the various worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yatzira, Asiya, this line of light emerges to kind of create those various worlds. But there are two key things regarding this light that we're going to focus on. Number one is that this line of light, this singular linear kav, it's called in Hebrew, emerges from what the Arizal calls the circular light of the Ein Sof, the round light of the Ein Sof. It's a linear light, it's like a beam or ray of light, which we've explained in the previous episodes, is an insignificant amount of light compared to what the Malchut Shel Ein Sof once received before the Tzimtzum. Because before the Tzimtzum, the Malchut of Ein Sof received endlessly, without any limitation. But now after the Tzimtzum, the light that she receives comes only in the form of a kav, a singular, linear, limited line of light. Compared to what she once received before the Tzimtzum, this line of light is insignificant. And it is not enough to fulfill the vast desire to receive that the Malchut of Ein Sof really has. Because the Malchut of Ein Sof contains within her own self 4 phases of desire. Bechina Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Dalid. And the Tzimtzum occurred upon the Bechina Dalid of the Malchut of Ein Sof. Which means that it is only the Bechina Dalid itself, the 4th and greatest level of the desire to receive within the Malchut of Ein Sof, that, first of all, the Tzimtzum occurred. The Tzimtzum occurred specifically on the Bechina Dalid, but more than that, that this Bechina Dalid is unfit to receive any light. Because it is the desire to receive, completely selfish, only for the sake of receiving. So it is the Bechina Dalid that is being contracted here. She is the one upon whom the Tzimtzum occurred, which means that she is not to receive light in the Bechina Dalid. Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, the previous 3 phases within the Malchut of Ein Sof, are not totally desire to receive. Rather, the desire to share and give dominates in them, in these 3 levels, more than it does in Bechina Dalid. Bechina Dalid has 0 of the desire to share, has 0 of the desire to give. It only knows how to receive, and it is for that reason that Bechina Dalid was contracted and she is left empty of light. That's the void. That's the halal that we're talking about here. It's the Bechina Dalid that remains empty. However, the Bechinat Aleph, Bet, and Gimel are still fit to receive the light even after the Tzimtzum. But although that may be true, the light withdraws from all 4 phases because of the Tzimtzum. So whenever the Tzimtzum happens, although the Tzimtzum was only upon the Bechina Dalid of Ein Sof, the first 3 phases of Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel nevertheless lose their light as well as a consequence of the Tzimtzum, because there's no partial in spirituality. So if the light leaves from Bechina Dalid, it leaves from Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel as well, because there is no partiality in the spiritual worlds. But nevertheless, the Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel are still fit to receive the light. So how does this work? How does this work? The light leaves from all 4 phases, but it is only Bechina Dalid, the 4th phase, that is unfit to receive the light. So therefore, the light is able to return up until Bechina Gimel. Meaning, Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel are still able to receive the light even after the Tzimtzum. All it takes is that the Bechina Dalid should desire to receive and pull a line of light from the Ein Sof, from the circular light of the Ein Sof, from above to below, to inhabit the space of the Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel of the Malchut HaMetzumtzemet, the Malchut that was contracted, the same Malchut of Ein Sof that was contracted and now remains empty. The first 3 phases of this Malchut are still worthy of receiving the light. But that's not the area of contention that we're dealing with in this class. Mainly, what does it mean that the light was circular. The light of Ein Sof is circular. That a singular line of light is a linear line of light, but it comes from the circular light of the Ein Sof. I want to make sure that the question first is clear before we get into the commentary by Rav Ashlag. Because the light of Ein Sof is described as circular. What does it mean circular? It means it's infinite, endless. There is no limitation. It is completely and utterly without a masach, no filter. There is no limit. It's infinite. Circle means infinite. In the wisdom of Kabbalah, when we're talking about the light of Ein Sof, that light is described as circular because the circle, the very shape of the circle, represents continuity. It represents cyclical nature of continuity. That's what we call infinity. That's why a circle goes round and round. It has no end point. There is no real end point as there is in, say, a square or a triangle. All the other shapes have a clear end point. They have multiple endpoints. There's a vertex, they have sides. But a circle has zero endpoint because it is endless. So the light of Ein Sof, meaning the light of God, is infinite. And that's why it's described as a circle. But the line of light that emerges from the light of God and into the void which was formed after the Tzimtzum, that light is not circular. It's not infinite. It's not endless. It's not limitless. Rather, this line of light is limited. It is, to be honest with you, that this line of light is insignificant in comparison to the endless light of Ein Sof, in comparison to the circular light of Ein Sof. This line that emerges anew from the Ein Sof, from the circular light of Ein Sof, and into the void is not circular. Rather, it's linear. It represents limitation. It's like a 0 and a 1. The 0 represents infinity, infinite possibilities. But the number 1 places a stop. It places a limitation. So, 0, or a circle rather, represents infinity, infinite possibilities, endless light of God. But a line, which is the way we write the number 1, is a line, represents limitation, represents putting a stop, represents an end point. Sof, the creation of a sof. And that's really what the line represents. It represents the limited reception of the Malchut HaMetzumtzemet after the Tzimtzum, in comparison to what she once had before the Tzimtzum, which was infinite. Because before the Tzimtzum, she received endlessly, in the form of circular light. She received circular light. But after the Tzimtzum, she only receives a singular line of light, which once again is insignificant in comparison to the endless light that she once received before the Tzimtzum. Now, let's jump into Rav Ashlag's commentary on the meaning of circular light. After I gave you a little bit of an explanation from my own self, let's see the way Rav Ashlag explains it in the book itself. Perusha shel temunat ha'igul kvar nitba'er la'al. The meaning of a circle has already been explained in Perek Aleph Ot Kuf in a previous class. ומשמיענו בזה שאפילו לאחר הצמצום נשאר האור העליון בתמונת העיגול. The meaning of this is that even after the tzimtzum, the upper light remains in the image of a circle. In other words, before the tzimtzum, the Ein Sof is described as a circle. The Ein Sof itself, before the contraction occurred, it's still regarded as a circle. But even after the contraction, even after the tzimtzum, the upper light is still regarded as a circle. So nothing changed about the shape, so to speak, of the upper light after the tzimtzum. It remained exactly as it was before the tzimtzum, which was that it is in the shape of a circle, representing the endless and infinite. Shepirusho bli hevchen madragot. Now, what does it mean that it was in the image of a circle? It means that the light was without differentiation of levels. there was no discernment between levels. There was no differences in levels. Specifically, we're talking about between the levels of Bechinat Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Dalid. We explained that there are 4 stages of desire within the Malchut of Ein Sof. But the truth is that before the Tzimtzum, whenever the Malchut of Ein Sof was one with the light, completely even, and there was no differences that were able to be discerned or recognized in the Ein Sof. So these 4 phases of desire were not differentiated in this manner of 1, 2, 3, and 4. That we understand them as being 4 levels of desire, but they were not on different levels before the Tzimtzum. Within the circular light, which is the very light of the Ein Sof, there are no differences between levels. There is no discerning a hierarchical structure between the various phases or levels of desire. Rather, they're all one. It says, Kol dalid habechinot shavot atzlo b'mala. It says that all 4 phases are even from his point of view. What does it mean that they are even? They are even in virtue. They are equal in virtue. It says, shavot b'ma'ala. That means in terms of their stature, in terms of their level or their quality, they were even and equal in their stature. They were not differentiated into 4 levels, one above the other or one below the other. Because the way we understand 4 levels of desire means that the first level of desire is the least, and the second level of desire is a little bit greater, and the third level is even greater, and the fourth level is even greater. So one comes after the other, and they are organized in a hierarchical structure, and they don't all have the same level. But in the Ein Sof, before the Tzimtzum, before the contraction actually occurred, these 4 levels were on the same level. They were not differentiated into 4 distinct categories. V'hata'am hu k'ma shekatuv la'al. And the reason is according to what we've explained above in the previous discourse. Asher inyan hachidush v'hamikra einam nohagim chas v'shalom be'or ha'elyon. He's saying that the reason that this is the case, that all 4 phases of desire are even from his point of view before the Tzimtzum, is because the concept of chidush, innovation or newness, vehamikra, and the concept of incidents or happenstance, einam nohagim, they do not apply, they do not relate, God forbid, to the light of Ein Sof, to the upper light. We don't regard the light of Ein Sof as new or as a happening. What does it mean? That the light never changes. In short, that means God never changes, because the light is God. When we're talking about the light of God, in essence, that is God. So, what does it mean that the light never changes? It means that God never changes. So, you can never regard the light as something that is new, because God is not something that is new. Rather, He's the oldest thing that exists. He's eternal. He never didn't exist. So there was never a point in time, so to speak, where He began to exist. Otherwise, if that were the case, then you could call Him new. The light can change. It could go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence. But that's not what God is. God didn't emerge from a state of non-existence. He was always there. So the light never changes. However, kol elu minei hahit chadshut ha'amurim, all of these types of renewals and changes that we're talking about in this wisdom, einam ela yachsei hakelim bilvad, are only referring to the vessels. They're only relating to the vessels, not to the lights. So, in other words, what he's saying is that the light of Ein Sof is a circle, meaning that it doesn't change. It's infinite and endless and limitless, and it has everything contained within it. Everything that could ever possibly exist, all the worlds, all the souls, they're already included in this circular light because it's the light of God. That's the light of God. And God, of course, is all-encompassing. Everything exists within the light of God. However, all of the chidushim, when we're talking about something new, that's only in reference to the vessels alone, not the light of God. And that's a very important distinction. Because these four phases of desire, Bechina Aleph, Bet, Gimel, and Dalid, which are the four phases of the desire to receive within the Ne'etzal, within the emanated being, they are only discerned one apart from the other after the Tzimtzum. And even after the Tzimtzum, they're still not able to be discerned because the line of light hasn't yet entered into the picture. Once the Kav, this is the truth, is that once the Kav of light enters into the space of Bechina Aleph, Bet, and Gimel, it is only then that the Shinui Tzura, the difference in form between Bechina Dalid in relationship to the previous three phases, is able to be discerned. Because before the Kav enters, these four phases are equally empty. They remain equally empty. That's why I said earlier that after the Tzimtzum, the light leaves not only Bechina Dalid, but Bechina Gimel, Bet, and Aleph as well, meaning the previous three phases. The preceding three phases, although they are still fit to receive the light even after the Tzimtzum, they nevertheless were stripped from their light as well. It was not only Bechina Dalid that was stripped from its light, as you might have expected, because it was Bechina Dalid upon which the Tzimtzum occurred. The Tzimtzum occurred upon the Bechina Dalid of the Malchut of Ein Sof, not upon the preceding three phases, but still, the light left not only from her, but also from the preceding three phases. So, after the Tzimtzum, all four phases are equally empty. The void is even across all four phases, and they are still not discernible one apart from the other. It is only after the Kav enters the picture, which we know that the Kav is pulled from below, the deep desire to receive that exists within the Bechina Dalid, which was contracted and remains in a void, it still desires to receive, so she continues to pull a light from the Ein Sof, from the circular light of Ein Sof, but nevertheless, since the Bechina Dalid was contracted, meaning that she is not fit to receive the light, therefore, the light is only able to inhabit the preceding three phases, wherein which the desire to receive is much thinner, it's much weaker, it's much smaller in comparison to Bechina Dalid. So it is for this reason that it only is able to pull a singular line of light, because that's all that she's able to receive, given that her Bechina Dalid, which is the great big deep desire to receive, has been contracted. If the Bechina Dalid was not contracted, then whenever she would pull the light, it would once again fulfill the Bechina Dalid, and the whole world would revert to the way it was before the contraction, which is that the circular light of Ein Sof occupies the vast Ratzon Lekabel, the desire to receive, of the Malchut of Ein Sof. And everything would return to the way it was before the contraction, as if nothing ever happened. And that would be a useless, and that's not useful. The whole point is that God wants to create the world, and He wants to He wants to engage in a relationship with His creation. So for that reason, He needed to contract the Bechina Dalid of the Malchut of Ein Sof, meaning His deepest desire, which is to be complete, His deepest desire, which is to be in a state of complete and utter oneness within His own self. Hu ushmo echad, that Him and His desire were one. He sacrificed that unity. He sacrificed that oneness in order to create the world so that He can have a relationship with us. The contraction was a sacrifice on God's part for the sake of forming a relationship with His creation. And that's really the truth. But just because the contraction happened doesn't mean that the Bechina Dalid doesn't still yearn to receive the light. That's the sacrifice, is that despite the pain of lack and not having the light, God continuously maintains Tzimtzum Aleph. He continuously maintains the emptiness within the Bechina Dalid, in order that there be able to come a singular line of light. Not so much light that it would overwhelm the vessels and revert to the state of Ein Sof before the contraction, but not so little that the whole creation would be unable to sustain and be unable to reach its destination. He gave a measured amount of light according to what the creation was able to receive without being destroyed from overwhelming light or malnourished from too little light. He gave exactly what the vessel was capable to receive in a healthy and structured manner, in a controlled manner. That's the meaning of the linear line of light, which emerges from the circular light of the Ein Sof. Now let's, move on. Well, I think, to be honest with you, I think we've gone for half an hour, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. That would be akin to giving you too much light. I don't want to overwhelm your vessels. So we'll keep it at that, and I guess we will continue with Ot Dalid in the following class, where we will finish Inyan Aleph, and either we will continue to Inyan Bet next class as well, or we're going to have to keep that for a future class. But nevertheless, we are quickly coming to the end of Chelek Aleph, and I appreciate everybody who's been joining me along this road. I know that this study is not easy, and yet the fact that you're here watching this video right now, whoever you are, that to me is inspiring, honestly, because it's not easy to learn this subject, especially if you don't have any prior knowledge, or if you're not learning from a skilled teacher like I am. I have a teacher for this. I'm not just reading this and coming to my own conclusions. So if you guys have any questions or comments or concerns or appreciations, I would love to hear from you in the comments section. So I'll see you in the next class.